Hello, my friends, and welcome to another live Penpot hands-on session. We are live, and that means you can ask questions as we go. So whichever platform you're on, you can leave me a little comment in the box, and either I will get back to you live, or one of the team will be able to answer your question. Today, we are going to look at design systems. This is an introduction to design systems with Penpot. So we'll be exploring a lots of little different things you can do with design systems in Penpot. And if you have any questions about building your design systems with Penpot, you know where to leave your questions. So let's start off with what is Penpot, because Penpot is a web-based open source design tool, which is great for both designers and developers. And you'll see a little bit about why later on. What is a design system? So design system is really a collection of shared guidelines. It has documentation, components, and all of these things you'll use to create a design project. It can help create a lot more consistent and cohesive designs across a project, and especially across teams, and save you a huge amount of time and effort. Now, the best practice for design systems is kind of that they're a living document, something that you are continually keeping updated as a team, and that you can change and grow and develop as time goes on. And Penpot's shared libraries are a really great way of doing this, creating these documents that you can share across your project and keep in sync with everything. So without further ado, I should probably jump in. So let's first look at how you would use a shared library. Now this is quite a small shared library that I have built. Here you're looking at my Penpot workspace, and this is my team for a little new site called The Current. And right here I have a collection of documents, files. I've got a mock-up for a homepage, and I've got a design patterns library, a color tokens library, a utilities library, and a typography library. And all of these are linked together. And I'll show you a little bit more about how I do that later. Now, your design system can really be as big or as small as you need it to be. Design systems are very unique to your team and what your team's needs are. And so you can have a little design system just on your project that you've made yourself and just working with yourself in order to speed up the process. Or you can have a massive design system that even includes code and other elements that the whole team works on together. So you can download some design systems, or libraries as we call them in Penpot, if you don't want to create your own, you want to see how somebody else does it. So I'm going to just show you. This is the Penpot libraries and templates collection. You can find this in the Penpot hub along with plugins as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about those plugins later. And very excitingly, you can now, if we scroll down, you can find Penpot's own design system inside of this libraries that you can download. Oh, excuse me, right. Now I'm going to download this file. And so I downloaded it previously. And go to my project. Now, if you want to import a design system, you can do it by going to this little options button and importing your Penpot files. And I've done this already just to save time. So I'm opening up, this is the pencil library. It's a big one, so it'll take a second to load. And I'm just going to show you, this is quite a complex library. So there's a getting started page that will tell you all about it. And then you can see there are lots of different aspects of the library, and they're arranged into pages, and then you can see everything that is in there. So you've got things like text areas, like look at all of these different statuses of the text areas as well. and how all of these different elements are used inside the Penpot workspace itself. This is a bit meta. It's like Penpot inside of Penpot. And these are all just a display of what you can get inside of the assets panel. So you can see that inside of this design system, there are 724 components, 34 colors, and 7 typographies. So if I go back to my workspace, now I showed you before, this is how you will import your libraries if you want to import them, if you're not just having them shared from your team. So that's using this little menu button and importing your files from here. And once you've downloaded a file like this, you can create a new file. And if you go into your Assets tab, you go to Libraries, and you can see here, penpotapp, that's the name of the design system. You can connect it to your file with this plus button. And then everything inside of that file is accessible from the Assets tab under penpotapp. So here's those components and those colors and those typographies all again. One of the things to look out for is whether a file is a library or not. And if it is a library, it will have this little library icon going on here. Now, I am going to move on to the next section, but before we get there, I wanted to ask you if you had any questions yet, just about importing libraries or anything like that. We can always answer your questions later. So whichever platform you're on, whether you're with us on YouTube or LinkedIn, you can ask a question in the comments and it will come up here and we can show it on the screen here and I can answer it for you live. If you come up with a question later on that you think of, you can always ask us in the community. So, is there a limit to how many shared libraries my team can use? No, not that I've come across yet. You can link multiple libraries to one file. If you import a library to your team, it will be there for the whole of your team to use, and then you can connect them to individual files on a per file basis. Do we have any other questions? Are there any pre-made libraries I can use? So I mentioned this before, but if we go to the Penpot Hub, and this is on the Penpot website, you can search for libraries and templates in search if you just want to find it that way. And if you go to Design System, you can find a huge bunch of kits and libraries and design systems that you can use to make get started with your projects as well. And so you don't have to start from scratch, although I'm going to show you how to do that today as well. So I think we're ready to jump straight in with the first aspect of a design system. I mean, it might not be the first one that you start with, but it's probably, I guess, the simplest is, yeah, it's the simplest one. I'm just going to say that. I'm going to commit to it. The simplest, which is color libraries. So now I'm going to go back into my current team project and I'm going to jump into this site homepage mockup that I've got here. So you can see this is a news site. What I've done is I've pulled different components into these mockups. This is actually an example that I built out for media queries. And what's interesting about it is I haven't just produced the same design over and over again. What I've done here is I've just made boards at roughly the size of these breakpoints. So I've got, this is how a site would display at greater than 1024 pixels. This is how it might display somewhere between 768 and 1024 pixels. And this is what it would display at roughly less than 768 pixels. So that's kind of similar to doing a mobile layout, a tablet layout, and a desktop layout. But the trick is that all of these are containing fully flexible components that are pulled into the layouts. So I didn't have to go and create all of these aspects over and over again and copy and paste them across the different layouts. I pulled them all in from my libraries. So With colors, you can watch the last hands-on session that I did, which you can find in the previous video. And there I really did a big deep dive into color libraries, but I will still give you a little quick summary here. So first off, how do you use a color from a shared library? I'm going to zoom right in. Now, maybe I want to change the color of these navigation links here. So I'm just going to select each of them. Now, they've got a color, which is light mode text accent. Now, this is a named color that's already in my library. So let's go find that color. If I go to the Assets tab and I go, it's not in the local library. It's not in here. It's in my color tokens. And under color tokens, I can find colors. Now, I've grouped these colors here. So there's a dark and there's light. And here are all of the colors that I've put in the light group. So you can find the colors in the assets here. You can also find them in the color picker. So say I go to add a color again, and this little drop down at the end of the color picker gives you the option to choose between your recent colors, your current files library, and all of the connected libraries that you've got. And so I will pick from the color tokens here. And this gives me a quick way to choose them by color. There's no names here unless you hover over them. So I don't know if that picks up on the screen. No, it doesn't. But you get a tooltip when you hover over your swatches that tells you the name of them. Or you can go to the color palette. So this is down the bottom of the canvas, and this little drop icon, if I press it, it will open up my color palettes. And from this menu here, I can again choose between which library I want to show in my color palette. So I can show color tokens. And you can see here, I can scroll through all of the colors that I've got available to me in the library. So there's a lot in here. And I could also switch between recent colors or these utility colors that I've got set up. And so I can change the color to something else that I want. So maybe I want to go to the text colors. I think blue is maybe a bit too eye-catching in the header, and I'm just going to go for a text emphasis color. So it's kind of just dark, but still quite plain. And you can see that that's now filled out in the section fill. I'm just going to hide the previous color. There we go. And that is how you use the color. Now, once you've chosen your colors, you might want to, and this is very important to me, accessibility, you might want to test out how those colors work, the text against the background. You want the color contrast to be sufficient that people can read it really easily. And a good way to double check that is to test it out. And so I'm going to just put a swatch of that emphasis color, and I'm going to get a swatch of the background color. So scroll through to my background body. Now, if I select these two shapes, these two filled shapes they are, and go to the plugins button. Now, I've installed these plugins earlier. You can get them again from the Penpot hub, and I've got a contrast plugin. So I'm going to open that up, and this is now telling me that the contrast ratio of my text color to my background color is 18.96 to 1. And it's saying that this is both compliant with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines at level AA and AAA. If you want to know a bit more about that, check out the previous hands-on session. And this is saying, yeah, these colors are good. These are very accessible contrast. So we are all good. But that brings me on to plugins. Now, plugins are very new. You might not have explored them yet. And we've actually got a plugins contest running right now for Penpot. This is pretty exciting because you can win prizes if you build a plugin for Penpot, and that includes a first prize of $1,000. So that's a fair amount of money for a little plugin. And for 20 honorable mentions, we'll get $200 each. And the deadline for submitting your plugins is December 15th, 2024, this year. So you've not got a huge amount of time, but you have got enough time. I've already been looking into developing plugins, and It's actually really straightforward. And what's great about it is you can use the frameworks and the tools that you like to use. It's all really easy to set up. There's some great starter kits out there that you can try out and get up and running really quickly. I managed to get a really basic plugin running locally on my machine really quickly. So if you're a developer, you want to work on your own plugin, I really recommend you check that out. If you go to penpot.app/plugins-contest, you'll be able to find more information there. So back to colors. If you want to ask me any questions about the colors before we move on to the next type of thing you can have in a library, element you can have in a library, that's a good word, better word than thing, a bit more specific. Do you have any questions about color libraries or anything else up to this point? You can always ask questions if you go in the comments section on YouTube or LinkedIn or whatever platform you're watching this on, and we will try to pick it up. Can I use multiple color libraries with one file? Yes, you can. And so you can see here in my assets tab, I've got this library for saying color tokens, and there's colors in there, and a library called utilities, and there's colors in there as well. And I can access these and easily switch between them in the palette. It's a really great way of being able to separate out different colors. Of course, you can group them here, but it's a good way of being able to separate them out further. I tell you what, I didn't show you yet. I didn't show you how to add a color to the library. Let's just do that one quickly. So maybe I'm going to decide that I want to name this, I want to give this entertainment link a different color. Maybe there's a special event going on and I want to make it some sort of shade of pink. So I want to create a new color. I'm going to go to fill and just create another fill. Remove that one. And I'm going to pick a random shade of pink. Let's make it fairly vibrant. There we go. So that's a nice shade of pink we've got going on there. Now, in order to add it, I can only add a color to my library that I'm currently in, which is a great way of making sure you don't accidentally break a library that you're connected to. So I'm going to go to my file library. And when I'm in the file library in the color picker, you can see there's a plus button here. And so if I use the plus button, that will add the color to the file library. And right now it's just named after the hex code for this pink color. If I now jump into my local library in the assets panel and I go to colors, there's my pink. And it's actually already, the text is selected so that I can give it a better name, something that's a lot more useful than just the hex code and makes it easier to share it with my team and to be able to find it later. So let me think. I want to give it a meaningful name. And so maybe I will call it, I'm going to call it Link Special Entertainment, because I might have other special link colors. And that will put it in a group called Link and a group called Special and name it Entertainment. So you can use slashes in order to group. Now, sorry, I did see a quick question pop up there. If we want to bring the question back up. Hi, Hayden. If I name a color primary, can I switch between libraries? I'm not sure I understand the question. Name the color primary. Oh, can you switch it between? I think I know what you mean, that you have a different primary in different libraries and switching between them will switch that color. No, but I'm going to show you something with design tokens later that will do just that. Is it possible to automatically generate tints and shades? Not automatically, but that's a really cool plugin idea. If someone wants to do a way of generating tints and shades, I will just show you something very quickly that I have made. And this you can download from the community. I've put all the files that I'm sharing here today on the community. So this utilities file, I've made this as a starter kit for your design systems. And what I've done as part of that is I have created a huge amount of color scales, which is another way of saying tints and shades, And what I'm slowly doing is adding in tints and shades or scales from the most popular frameworks. And so right now I've already put all of the Tailwind colors in here. And so these are displayed here on the canvas, but they're also all accessible from inside of the colors. So you can get each of, so you want to get your blue 050 Tailwind color, you can grab that. And if you import this library, you can use those in all of your files as well. Any more questions on colors before I move on? I think colors will be included in the upcoming tokens feature. So will this replace the current color library in some way? Not replace it, but you can use them together, or you can use them as an alternative for each other. Some people might not want to work with tokens in this way. And I'm not sure if the feature is going to develop further, but I will show you how I've used it later on today. Right, I think it's time to move on before I run out of time to typography libraries. Now for that, I'm just going to switch back to my site mockup. So much like in the colors section, if I go to assets and I look at my libraries that I've got in here, I can find the typography library that I've added. Now inside here is a whole bunch of typographies, as we call them in Penpot. Now I've grouped them into primary and secondary typeface. So all of these primary typographies use the Sora typeface, and all of these secondary ones use the fig tree typeface. And I've named these and based these typographies around elements in HTML, because that means they map really nicely to your content. So I've got heading levels, and I've got strong and small and emphasis and body text. Now you might notice that I've put a P and an S at the beginnings of the names of these typographies, and that's to make them very easy to organize inside of the typographies palette. So much like the color palette in the bottom, I switched to the T, which is typographies, and I can scroll through all of the typographies available to me. Now, because I put this little P and S at the beginning of each of these, it actually means that these are all organized nicely alphabetically. So first I'll go through all of the primary and then all the secondary typographies, and I can pick from them. So let's have a look at how I might use a typography. I'm just going to grab one of these cards and let's pop it there and make a board around it. On the board, there we go. So I've got very nice sans serif, or I guess serif. These have got tiny little serifs, but it's sans serif font. And maybe I want to switch it to something else. So I'm going to go for a plainer typeface for this, because right now I'm using the Sora for this top one, and it's fig tree for this bottom one. Fig tree is a little bit of a plainer, easier to read sans serif. So for that, I'm going to find the fig tree. Oh, too big. And just try out there we go. That's a bit better. I'll go for that. And that's how I pick it. I just pick it from the typographies palette, just like that. Now, maybe I want to change it to a different typography. You can see right now here, if I select the text itself, you can see the typography is there. So I'm going to create a new typography. I'm going to break this link, which allows me to edit the typography. And I'm going to use Literata. I'm going to go for an old school, more serif feel. And maybe I'll make it a touch bigger. Too big. And use a slightly heavier weight, perhaps. And maybe because it's a bit bigger, I'm going to take that line height down a bit. Now, when you save a typography, it's not just saving the font, it's also saving the font size, the font weight, the line height, the spacing, the casing, the alignment, and also the layout. And I'm going to use the plus button to add a typography. By default, it will name it after the font and the font weight. So if you end up with a lot of typographies called the same thing, you probably press that plus button a lot. I've seen that a few times. So now if I go into my assets, now I've just added it here. So that means it's in my local library. And I'm going to rename it and I'm going to give it a better name. So I've just pressed the menu button and I'm going to call this, it's going to be in my headlines collection. So that's a group. I'm going to put a slash after that to group it. And I'm going to call it traditional. I mean, my traditional headline. And then I can press that little check mark to save my changes. And now if I look in my local library, you can see I've got my traditional typography down there. So if I select this text and I want to make it into headline as well, for some reason, I can just hit that and it uses that typography too. What was that? I showed you that you could attach it, but let me just show you again. If you did want to, say you wanted to do a similar typography to this, but just a little bit different, and you want to create another named typography for that, you hover over the name of the typography and this little link button will appear. If you press it to break the link, and then say I want to do a smaller version, I'm going to make that 21. I'm going to add that. Maybe I'm going to make it a regular weight as well. Add that in, and you can see it's appeared in my local library already. And I'll rename that so it matches. And this is going to be headlines, traditional, small. Yeah, my naming skills on the fly, not ideal. So this might not be the best way to name your items. If anyone has any opinions on naming in design systems, I'd love to hear them. Always up for a discussion / argument about naming things. And so that's how you do that. Do we have any questions about using typography libraries or anything else I've discussed before? Can you use font families and sets rather than individual font names? Now, is that in the naming or whether you're using it in your typography itself? Because so a typography is a very specific style of text. So it is the headline, it's the font, it is the size, it is the line height. And so if you wanted to use a variety in that set, then you would create a different typography for each one you wanted to create in your variety. So you can create sets as big as you like in that sense. I hope I got the gist of your question. If not, try asking it again in a different way that someone as daft as me might understand. Do we have any more questions about typographies? Can you update an item already saved to the library and save over what is already saved? That is a fantastic question. And yes, and that's one of the great features of using typographies, because say you applied this typography to multiple items across your mock-up that you've made, then you're like, oh, but actually I wanted to make it a different font or a bit bigger. You go into your assets panel and go to your typography and say, oh, actually, I thought that the small one should actually be even smaller. I go to this button here to edit my typography, and then I can change what's already in here under the name traditional small. That's why you often want to use naming that is unspecific to the style, but specific to the use. And so say I'm going to make it even smaller, but I'm going to make it bolder, so it's still got a heading vibe to it. And then if I press the check mark, that has updated it, and it will update it across every place that it is used. Do we have any other questions? Can you move your typographies from your local library to another library by dragging it over? Not by dragging it over, but you can, in the process of exporting a library, you can flatten the typographies from other libraries into that file. So that's one trick you could do it with. Otherwise, what I would probably do if you wanted to use the typographies, I'm trying to think what the use case would be for that, because you can move your libraries and share your libraries across multiple files. And so I don't know what the need is to have it specific to that file. But yeah, I'd say the best way of doing that is go to export your file, and I'll show you a little bit later how to do that. And there's a setting you can use there which will actually bring everything into your file libraries assets instead. Okay, any other questions? I'm quite tempted to, oh, we go, one more. Is there a way to use a fluid type scale rather than rely on fixed pixel values? No, not right now. However, I personally love using fluid type scales. Fluid type scales are a really great concept where your type will adjust depending on the width of your viewport. And the way that, and I tend to do this with responsive design in general, when I'm looking at designs like this, is I'm seeing these kinds of mock-ups as being like snapshots of a design. Because there's only so much you can convey statically for something that is responsive. And so what I would do is I would maybe choose different breakpoints that I can use as examples of, oh, okay, when the typeface is at this size, this is the size it will be rendered at when it's at this particular breakpoint. Maybe even break it into those breakpoints in your library as well, or just pick a kind of default like size that you're going to start at, and then later on. But it's a really good challenge to think about how you could implement fluid typography in Penpot, and given the abilities we have with Flex and Grid, I definitely think it would be possible. So hey, go make a feature request. I'd be right behind you, because I think that's a really great idea as well. Right, keep your questions for later, because otherwise I'm going to run out of time. I've got so much to show you. It's very exciting. So let's move on to component libraries. So what are components? Well, components are just really small or massive reusable design patterns. So for example, here in my mock-up, this little search with the icon alongside it, this is a widget, and it's called the search widget, and this is a component itself. In fact, the icon I've used is a component as well, but also the entirety of this header is a component that contains the navigation and the title and search widget and the weather widget. This is the large header component. So really a component can be anything you want it to be. And the key is that when you've created it, you can reuse it in multiple places and only have to update it in one place. So where do you find your components? So in your assets tab, in your libraries, I've set up my components in a design patterns file, because that's the way I like to think about components, as reusable patterns. And so here I have different groups of components. I've got cards, I've got footers, I've got forms, I've got headers, I've got icons, all the way down. I've got lots of different social icons, and I can display them either as a list, or sometimes it's quite nice to display them as tiles when you've got things like icons as well. And if I wanted to use a component, well, I'm just going to drag it. I'll create a new board, actually, make it a bit easier. I can just drag a component from here. So I'm going to use a minimal card. I already used a minimal one. I'm going to use a featured one. And I just drag it from my assets straight onto the canvas. Now it's on the board. It's a bit big for this board. I'm just going to give this board a little bit of layout. So I'm going to make it flex layout. Don't need negative margins. Got padding. Okay. So first of all, I want to fit my component to this board. So I'm just going to tweak that. And I'm going to make it, I've set it so that the component is the height of its contents and fits the width of the available space to it. And there you go. I've just pulled that component in, and I've got my little card displaying nicely. Now, I've got the component in there. I can start overriding aspects of it. So maybe this headline is going to be a sci-fi game, Cozy Farm, Jupiter edition. Can't type, can never type when I'm doing a live stream. Is best selling game of all time. So I can override the text in a component. I can override the attributes of the component as well. So maybe I want to give this card itself a little bit of padding. And then maybe I want to give it a different background color. I'm going to find another nice background color in my color tokens. I'm going to say background subtle. That's a bit hard to see, isn't it? Background accent. Still subtle, but it is kind of a bluish, light blue background that I've got there. But this doesn't affect the original component. And I can always reset what I've already done to this component by right-clicking my component and saying reset override. So this will return all the changes I've made to the component back to what the original component is like. Bit sad to lose those. So I'll go back again. If I don't want changes to the original component, the main component, to override my like what I've done, my changes and overrides I've made to the component, I can right click and I can detach this instance of the component from the main component. And now it is its own thing. If you look in the layers, you can see that previously to detaching it, it's purple and it has a little diamond icon alongside it. This means it's a component instance. And once I've detached it, it just becomes an ordinary layer. This is a layer with a flex layout. So what next? Oh, how to create a component. So maybe I've detached this component. Maybe I want to create a new one. So I can right click, or I can use the whatever your command or control shortcut is, depending on your operating system, K, or I can just create component by right clicking and choosing create component. So you can now tell this is a main component because it's got a double diamond in the layer list here, and it's going to be named according to its layer. So similarly to how we grouped things by using slashes before, you can do this in your layer names. But maybe because this is a different, I've given it a different color. So I'm going to call this small secondary. And now I can find this component that I've created, again in my local library, under components. And there's my card, it's featured, and there it is, my little card with its very subtle blue background. You can also rename your component from here if you want to come up with a better name. It's going to be easier to see if it's in list mode. There we go. So I can maybe say small blue instead. I don't like naming things after colors because not everyone perceives colors in the same way, but I'll do it for now. I can maybe remove the featured group from it, and that's a quick way of doing that. So I can rename it from the local library too. If I want to add another instance of this component to my board, let's put a bit of space between them with this lovely flex layout. And say I give this a different name, some different text. What is this text going to be here? Sculpture of a giant mousetrap wins Turner Prize. This is just so you can tell that these two components are different. If I go to layers, you can see here in the layers, this double diamond, this is the main component. This single diamond is a component instance. So if I update the main component, the changes will be reflected in the component instance. So for example, maybe I want to change the background color again. Let's do something garish this time. It's going to really burn your eyes. I'm going to use this border warning color. So you see, I've just changed that to yellow and it has automatically updated the other component instance with that yellow background color. I'm going to undo that because it was really ugly and it hurts my eyes and I don't want to look at it anymore. Right. Very quickly, do I have time to show you this? Yes, I'll do it really quickly. Another really cool feature is, of course, you can do these really cool flex and grid layouts in Penpot, and sometimes you want to reuse those in other places. So you can actually create components for layouts. So I'm going to create a quick layout here. So I've added a board for my layout. I'm going to make it let's do a grid. So this is the grid layout. Default, it's got 2 rows, 2 columns, and I'm going to put 20 between each row and column, 40 around the outside in padding. I'm like, yeah, that's really cool, really reusable. I'm going to call this the 2x2 grid layout, and I'm going to turn that into a component. And now I can find that component in my local library, not grouped it in any way, and I can easily drag it in and start putting things into my layout. So it's really useful to have layout components like that. The one trick I would have to tell you is that when you go to use it, you can't edit anything inside this because it's a component. You can't add anything into it because it's a component. And so before you use your layout, you want to detach it. And then you can move things like your cards into your grid layout. This card is too big, so it's overflowing the space. Not ideal, but there we go. That's layout components. Do we have any questions about components, dare I ask, before we move on? Is there a way to view a number of components where designers have made overrides? No, there isn't, but that would be a really useful feature. I'd put that as a feature request in with the Penpot team. They're very responsive. They love your feature requests and suggestions. Do we have any other questions? Will components still exist even if they aren't on a board? No, I don't. No. There we go. No, they don't. I was just having to double check that. Yeah. So that's why libraries are a really good setup for components, because you don't necessarily want to have all your main components messing up your file or making changes to them accidentally. And so it can be really useful to stash them in a library somewhere. Or another common practice is to maybe make a separate page for your components, call them something like main components, and then add them all in that page. And then you can pull them out of your assets folder for use on other pages. Right, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move on to publishing shared libraries. Now, as you can see from the example team projects I've got here, you can see that I've published shared libraries for the rest of my team to use. And this is a really useful thing to be able to do for your whole team, is to be able to share these libraries that you've created between you. So I'm going to create a quick new file, and I'm going to call it my blue library. And I'm going to add a color. I'm just making the shape to help me add the color. I don't actually need to have anything on the canvas to create a library. I can just have colors and typographies in the assets tab, and that is fine for a library. Of course, as we just talked about, if you want to have components, you'll need to create the main components on the canvas. So I'm just going to make a nice blue color, and I'm going to add that to my file library. And I'm going to call this special blue. See, now I'm deleting that shape. It's gone, but my color is still in the library there. And I'm ready to publish this library. It's only got one color in it, but hey, your brand colors are very important. So I'm going to go to the libraries, and here it will tell me libraries in this file. What have I got in my library? One color, and I'm ready to publish it. So there we go, done, shared library, as easy as that. If I go back to my workspace, you can see I've got my blue library. You can tell it's a library because it's got that library icon in there. And if I go into my site mockup, I go to the Assets tab, go to the Libraries, and I want to add in the blue library. There we go, popped up. If you've got a lot, searching can be really helpful to help you find them. And I'm going to use the plus button to connect this library to my file. And now if I look in here, blue library, there's my special blue color. So maybe I'm going to make this text into special blue. And yeah, I think that looks good. Yeah, so I've added the special blue color in here. Now, what if I have an update to the library and I want to change that special blue? That special blue is not quite the right kind of blue. Now go back into my blue library. I'm going to go to assets. I'm going to edit the color. I'm going to say, maybe that kind of blue is not very special. I'm going to make it more of a greeny blue. That's going to be more special. And then I save the color style. So it's changed the color. I'm going to return to my mockup. And now you can see, oh, there are updates in my shared library. So you get notified that something has changed. And if I go to this more info section and go to the updates tab, it's going to tell me this is the library that's updated and this is the change that has been made in my library. So now I know, okay, the special blue is going to be updated. Hit update. And you can see that the blue color, I mean, can you remember what the color was before? It was a bit darker. Now it's a bit greenier. So the color has updated across the file as well. So you can use that to keep everything in sync. Very, very cool. Next up, oh yes. So I've got this library, but look at this boring gray box. Like, what is this? It's because there's nothing in the file. So it's quite nice to add a little cover for your libraries. And you can do this for any of your files, but particularly important for libraries to tell your team what it's for. So I'm going to very quickly connect my utilities library here, because what I've got in there is a component, which is a cover board. And that means I can say this is going to be blue library special colors. So I've got a little cover here. And then if I right click the board and I choose set as thumbnail, this will set my cover as a thumbnail. And now if I return to the workspace, that thumbnail will show up and tell everyone on my team that this is where you find the blue library with the special colors. So earlier I mentioned flattening down your library. So if you have a lot of libraries like this and you want them to all be included in one file, I'm not really sure why you'd use that, but what you might want to do is export your file. Maybe you want to back it up or something. So if you want to do that, you can go to your file and you can download it. When you go to download it, you have all of these options here. So you have an option to export your file and you export it with its shared libraries. Now, this is what I would recommend. And if you go to the community right now, you can find the files that I've been using here. And I have downloaded them in this way. And what that means is it's one file, but when you import it to your workspace, it will bring all of those libraries along with it, maintain the linkage between those libraries and how everything works. So I'd say that's a really good way to preserve that. But the other options that you have is to include your shared library assets in your file libraries. So that would be the way that you merge the library assets from other libraries into your file library. So you're still keeping them as saved, named colors, typographies, components, but they are all in that one file library. Or you can treat your shared library assets as basic objects. What that will do is break the typographies and the colors and the components, and it will just flatten everything into basic objects. And maybe that will simplify it for you. I'm not really sure. There must be a good use case for it, but I can't think of it off the top of my head right now. But if you want to do that, that's what you can do there. Hey, maybe it's just a quick shortcut to breaking all those connections if you wanted to. Now, do we have any questions? We've only got 10 minutes left and I want to have time for the design tokens preview. So really quick. Wow. So you don't need to go through a whole publish flow to make changes to the library like Figma. No, you do not. I mean, this is for files that are shared amongst your team, your library. Of course, if you download this and share it on the web, of course, the linkage won't be maintained. But yeah, across your team, you might want to set up like a publishing workflow within your team so that you're agreed on what does and doesn't get into a shared file. But no, that is just how you do it. You can just change the library file itself and it will be updated. Do we have any more questions about publishing libraries? When you publish a library, who gets access to it? Does it go to the Penpot library? No. So when you publish a library, it is shared in your team. So if you look at this drop down here, I've got a huge amount of teams in here. All of the libraries I've got here are only shared inside the current team. All of the projects in the current team can access it, but only that team can access it. So if I go back to my Penpot, what a mess this is. If I'm making and working and testing a library inside here, no one else has access to it outside of my Penpot. And so only the people in your team have access to that library, unless you choose to download it and share it elsewhere. Okay. Next up, I have something really exciting I want to share with you, and that is a preview of design tokens. You may have seen one in the live last week. This time, I've shown you how I might use design tokens with my site mockup itself. So this mockup here, how I might use design tokens with an implementation of this. So hopefully it is something that you haven't seen before. So let's check out the design tokens. Now, this is coming very soon to Penpot. So alongside my Assets tab, you see there's a Tokens tab. And in here, I have lots of different token types where I can create tokens inside of there. So maybe I'm going to create a border radius token. So I'll call it something dull, like border radius. And I give it a value. A token is essentially a value with a name, a tiny little thing. And then I can save that and then I can use it. But what I find really powerful is you saw all those color tokens that I had before. So I've created these sets with those color tokens that I made, but I've used them as actual design tokens here, using the design token syntax as well. And I've added it to my fill. This is my body color. I'm going to add the design token there. So that is saying in the light theme, add this body, and in the dark you can see that the BG body token is used for the dark theme as well. So now I can just switch between my themes, my modes, and I've gone to dark mode and I've gone to light mode. And of course I can go back and go to dark mode again, and then I can return to light mode. So it makes it really easy to be able to create sets that you can switch there for any kind of modes you like. And what I can also do is once I have those tokens, I can export them as a JSON file in the standard design tokens format, which is really useful for development too. And I can also import those files too. So if I've created design tokens in another system elsewhere, I can import those into Penpot and use those right away in my designs. And so that is design tokens. I did have that pre-recorded as a video, so I can also show you if you do have any specific questions about design tokens. But we are running rapidly out of time. So just before I go, do we have any final questions? This is a reminder that if you leave any questions here, we'll answer them later. And also you can always join us in the community. The Penpot community is a really lovely place and you can ask your questions there. And there are not just people in the community, but people on the Penpot team who will answer your questions. You will see me in there. I will answer your questions too, so you can always ask them later. Is there any notion of versioning in published libraries? No, right now you can set up whatever versioning system works for you. So if you wanted to create named versions so that maybe you create a new library every time so that people can then choose to download and upgrade to your library. But I'd say that's a good feature request. I would put that in. I'd use that for sure. I think that would be really useful. Do we have any other questions? There's no opportunity for adding a change description either. No, not right now, but I agree. I think that would be really useful. And if you think about like maybe like a Git kind of updating workflow, I think anything that mirrors that makes it a lot easier for teams to get on board with. So I think that that would be a very cool feature to have. One more question? Looking at the timer ticking down. Well, then that's great. I can tell you that if you have any more questions about these kinds of things, or you want to see design systems or Flex or grid or components or anything else in action, I'll be back in just 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks' time, I will be doing the final hands-on session of the year. And this is just UI design. It's a very broad topic. And the idea is that I want to show you how I work on a design from start to finish. I'm aware that in these demos, I've been showing you a lot of examples that I've already created. And I've not shown you how I've done every little bit. And I know that people want to see how you actually pull components into Flex and grid layouts. I know that you want to see how you nest components inside each other, best practices for these kinds of things, or at least LoRa practices for these kinds of things. And so that's what I'm going to do. But do you have any ideas? What do you want to see me create? I guess skills willing, I will do my best. But if you have anything that maybe a use case that you use every day, maybe a particular technique or approach that you want to see, just let me know in the comments or post something on the community. I really am open to your ideas. Please help me, give me some inspiration. Otherwise, I'll be forced to come up with something really strange, and we don't want that, do we? So if you want to keep up to date with what's going on Penpot, you know you can find us on all of the usual social platforms. I would also recommend sticking around in the community too. If you follow or subscribe to us on these various channels or platforms, you'll also be the first to be notified when our next live sessions are coming up. And of course, you should sign up for Penpot. It's great. You've just seen how great it is. And it is free and it's open source. And so why not? Get going. There's no limit to your team. You can just try it out today, get everyone on board. Developers are welcome and they are not treated as a separate mode. So it's great. It's got loads of features and I would highly recommend it. Thank you everyone so much for joining me today. Thank you for all of your questions and your comments. I really appreciate it. And I will see you again very soon. Goodbye.